I'm Sarah from Sarah Arts a Lot, and today I will be showing you how to make art journal prompt cards or regular art prompt cards um, like this. Nothing fancy, but it's a really good tool for me, at least, for preventing and getting over creative blocks and to get ideas and to not get stuck at any point during the process of creating things. So if that seems interesting to you, stay tuned, and I will show you exactly how I make these cards. Some things you will need is first a thick paper. I use this recycled bristle from paper from Canson. I just really like it because it is a nice texture. It's the same type of paper that I like to doodle on and make a lot of art, so if I have a lot extra more than what I need for making cards, it's not going to waste, and it's nice and thick. It's about the thickness of a cardstock, a little bit thicker than a cardstock that you would buy from like an office supply store or something like that, but any thick paper should work. As long as, I would say actually get something smaller than this pad that I have, because if you're going to be using a paper trimmer at least, because this does not fit in my paper trimmer, so I always have to cut it up with some scissors first. But any thick paper will work for this. Next, you will need something to write with. And I like to use something permanent because if I accidentally get my cards wet, it's not the end of the world as long as the writing on it doesn't run. Like, they might get a bit warped and stuff if they get wet, but for how I use them, it doesn't, which I will get into later, it doesn't really impact me too much. So I use a Sharpie, just because it's not as precious as the like permanent pens that I like to draw with and stuff, and it's pretty cheap. Then you will need something to cut the paper down to the size of the card that you want to use. I use a paper trimmer, which I would highly recommend using a paper trimmer with a ruler on it. Because that will help you get really straight, even edges, and also you'll be able to measure it and make sure it's the exact size that you want. But if you don't have a paper trimmer, or for some reason don't want to use your paper trimmer, you can use a ruler and a pair of scissors, or even a ruler and a knife would probably be a bit better than that, because you could run the knife alongside the ruler. And if you don't have a ruler, you can just eyeball it. They'll just be a little bit wonky, and you might not want to shuffle those like you would a regular stack of playing cards, because the unevenness could negatively impact how easy they are to shuffle. And the final thing you will need is, well, you might want, this is more of a nice to have thing. You don't actually need this, but it is a corner rounder. Punch. I got this secondhand, and I like it because it makes the corners of the cards like nice and round and smooth, so I'm less likely to stab myself with the corner of the card. So if you don't have this, you can always try rounding it with like a pair of scissors or something. It's just going to be a bit more tricky. So the first step for making your own art journal prompt cards is to cut your paper down to the size you want. Now I'm using some recycled Bristol paper, like I mentioned during the supply section earlier, but you can use any sort of paper you want. I recommend using a thicker paper just because that's a bit more durable, and if you want to shuffle by hand, that makes it a bit easier too. But my sheet is like 14 inches by 17 inches is what I start out with. That's a bit too big for my paper cutter, so I just kind of cut it more or less in half, just so I can fit it in this thing. at the time that I bought my paper pad, that was the smallest size that they had. But, and if your blade pops out like mine just did, you just stick it back in. I've been having that happen a lot. But the size that I cut my cards to is 3.5 inches by 2.5 inches. I think I used the side that's not as straight there. Okay, there we go. That's better. If you have to cut your paper in half with scissors like I did, one of your sides is going to be uneven, and that can make the measurements a bit wonky. So you're going to want to have the flat edge on against the ruler side of your paper trimmer. And though if you don't care too much about wonkiness, I mean, you can always just take a pair of scissors and cut the cards down to whatever size you want. The reason I am doing 3.5 by 2.5 inches is because I already have some cards. That looks a little uneven too. But I already have some cards that some prompt cards that I had purchased. And I just like them all to be relatively the same size and shape. I don't actually shuffle them like normal. I have a huge box full of the prompt cards where I just grab a handful that I use for that day instead. So I really don't necessarily even need them to be the same size, but I like having them the same size. So once you have your card cut, now this step is very optional and only if you don't want these sharp pointy corners. I have a corner rounder punch that I use to make the corners nice and smoother, and that way I find these a bit too pokey and the sharp corners, and sometimes I've hurt myself a little bit on accident when grabbing them if I don't round the corners. So this is optional, but highly recommended. If you don't have a corner rounder, you can try using a pair of scissors to round the corners, which I will demonstrate now. I'm not very good at this, which is why I got the corner rounder. Oh, that actually turned out okay. But now, I find that I'm, cutting down that whole side, which I don't necessarily want to do, because that starts changing the size of the card just slightly, but so you can always use a pair of scissors if you don't have a corner rounder and you're a little worried about the corners poking at you. Yeah, but once you have it cut and the corners rounded, if you want them rounded, now the only thing left to do is just write the prompt that you want on the card. So you can realistically use anything you want to write the prompt. I recommend using something permanent, or at least not reactive to water. So I'm going to use a Sharpie, and that's just because I have my cards out on my desk when I'm creating. So if I accidentally spill some watercolor or something on it, or get some water splattered on it, I don't want the prompt to run and have to remake the card. So what I always do is I start on the back of the card. I give it a category, which I use the categories either marks, techniques, or journaling, and that's kind of inspired by one of the packs that I got, the Get Messy's art prompt deck, because they have it categorized in medium, marks, journaling, or techniques, and I just kind of wanted to do the same thing. So I will make this a marks card. I don't really have a prompt that I need to make a card for, so I'm just kind of making this up on the spot. But let's say I want a prompt for wavy lines. And the cool thing about this too is if you have enough space left on your card, you can add some imagery or something like that if you want to make you to kind of jog your memory of what the heck you meant in case words aren't enough, or in case your handwriting is bad and your E's look like C's like mine kind of does there. So I can draw some wavy lines here so I know, okay, that does say wavy lines, not wavy links or something. So yeah, that's how you do that. If you need some ideas for prompts, I will have a list on my website, which I will link in the description below. And in the meantime, here are a few more cards that I had made. So I've got a few that just kind of like change the order of like how the cards come up. So I've got like pull from the bottom of the deck. I just kind of like doing that sort of thing. It makes it a bit more gamified for me and a bit more like surprising and stuff. I know I also have a few where it's like roll a 20-sided die and go back that many cards and repeat that prompt and things like that. Reshuffle the deck, stuff like that. I like having a few cards like that in there. And imply lines with marks, so that would be okay, I do have this as a marks card. Sometimes I get a little weird with the categorization, so you really don't need to categorize them like I do. But this would be doing things like putting dots along a path to make it look kind of like there's a line, but it's not really a line. We've got another technique card here. Pattern as aura, so this comes from some Zentangle techniques and stuff with auras, which is like a technique of outlining things and whatnot. So this is basically, if this card came up, I would use a doodle pattern that I like to kind of frame or outline something on the page. Got outline with watercolor, pencil, and blend. Add gesso with a card, so like a gift card or credit card or something. Write about your identity. So some of these are just like kind of vague journal prompts. Write a phrase largely with a paint pen and paint over some words. So if I had some writing, might paint over that, or if I had a book page on the in the piece or magazine words or something like that, just covering those with paint is typically how I'd interpret that. So hopefully that helps you get you some ideas. Some places I usually like to look for ideas is just like watching other people's YouTube videos and getting like techniques, and if there's any like interesting marks or something like that, I'll probably make a card. If I discovered something new while creating, then I'll make a card for that too. Like recently I used a water-soluble, like chunky charcoal stick thing and had gone over it with, this was actually an accident. I didn't actually go over it with acrylic medium, but I had glued down some collage and then went over that with acrylic medium, but that spread the charcoal around, and I was like, ooh, that's kind of cool. So I made it into a card. But yeah. So I hope that was helpful for you. If you need some ideas of how to actually use the prompt cards, a lot of times I'll just like do a sort of pull as I go, or I might like pull a few cards and then pick one of them out of that bunch, and stuff. So typically I'll keep pulling cards as I'm creating, and use that to get ideas for what to do next in a page. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope you have fun making your own art prompt cards. And until next time, I hope you have a wonderful day.